Dre's doing last second work. Why? Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Second verse, same as the first. Actually, third verse, same as the second verse, same as the first verse. We're going to be talking the NBA playoffs and Game of Thrones. That's all we really have time for these days. And even with that, Brian, we've been going like almost 2 hours. So anyway, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Boxscore Brian. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? You're so right about that. I guess the good news is for our show that there are less playoff series now. We're down to the final four teams. Of course, bad news for us as NBA viewers. The season's almost over. But still, it's been a heck of a playoffs and a heck of a Game of Thrones.
All right. Now, as always, despite the fact that if you interact with the internet at all, and by that I mean if you go to Twitter, if you even hop onto like Yahoo or MSN, Game of Thrones is long since spoiled. You know, there are headlines that are like, oh my God, can you believe that Bran turns into Thanos and uses the Infinity Gauntlet to do something with Snape or whatever? That happens the next day immediately. I will say we're going to leave Game of Thrones spoilers out and until we get to it. So I'll just make sure that we've got that clear, Brian, for you and me. And I'll just describe my Sunday. I was pretty much out of it, sick all of Sunday. I was in bed, I'm pretty sure with the flu. Did get a flu shot, but you know they're not always 100%. I woke up, someone had DM'd me on Twitter, and I logged into Twitter to see what they had said, and they basically said, sorry to hear about the Portland Trailblazers, and I was like, oh, dang it. And then because I'd logged into Twitter, there was a Game of Thrones spoilers. So my Sunday, Brian, was being depressed by the NBA playoffs and then watching Game of Thrones and getting depressed there as well. But we'll get to it. But let's start with the playoffs. Let's just get the heartache out of the way. We're going to go most heartache to least heartache, and we're going to give the fan tie to Brian because, of course, he's a Golden State homer, and we're a big fan of the Warriors. So, admittedly, I would say Kawhi winning on a triple bounce buzzer beater would normally get the number one spot, but, you know, a Kevin Durant-less Warriors beating the Rockets is going to get the win today. Denver versus Portland. Now, I did some of this, Brian. We don't have a great way of displaying it. It's a tool I've had in my back pocket for a while I've wanted to do. But I did a very simple bit of logic. It's following the Arturo's shortened rotation playoff principle. So the idea is the NBA is really a two-phase race. In the regular season, you want to have a deep bench, enough players to be able to handle, you know, the injuries, random rests, etc. Come playoff time, though, you basically are going to be playing your top six players as much as you can to win. One of the players we know that's exploited this for years and why he was able to be so good out east was LeBron James. We might look at a regular season LeBron James team and go, I don't know if they'll compete in the playoffs, but 40-plus minutes of LeBron James is much, much different than 33 minutes of LeBron James. So using this logic, I went over every team in the second round of the playoffs. I look at the minutes they distributed to their player in the second round of the playoffs, looked at their regular season production and just said, how strong did each of these teams look? And the reality of that, which is either optimistic or depressing, depending on your point of view, is the stronger team won every single series. Now, this was nuts to me, Brian. I did look this up. The Toronto Raptors versus Philadelphia 76ers. This isn't adjusted for anything, so this isn't wins produced, but this is just raw production per 48. Toronto had a 337, assuming their regular season production, a 337 adjusted production per 48. The Philadelphia 76ers, 334. So that was an incredible, you know, that series did in fact come down to the wire. And that's where my depression actually comes up with the Nuggets versus Portland. The Denver Nuggets were actually, despite the fact that they had home court, despite the fact that they went to Game 7, were actually a weaker squad. And, you know, the depressing part about this is there are players on Portland that we might mock, but Denver's backcourt that looked really promising last season, just, you know, I think some injuries to Will Barton. Jamal Murray has just been kind of up and down. Same with Gary Harris. You know, our backcourt just wasn't as strong. Our strength was in our bigs. You've noted this kind of thing all the time, Brian, in the playoffs, where if you have the stronger front court exploited, the Nuggets really did not. The only real front court player they had that played, two players that played a lot of minutes were Jokic and Millsap, which admittedly is great. But the problem is Millsap basically played as many minutes as Cantor. Cantor is surprisingly a better player. And then once we started getting down to some other players, the backcourt just overwhelmed. So if the Nuggets had maybe given some more minutes to Mason Plumlee, maybe even to Monte Morris. This was an interesting one. Monte Morris was a better guard than a lot of the guards that got burned in this playoff. So that was kind of a bummer. I can't fault them too much. This was a close series. It was, it was a 4-point game in Game 7, so I can't feel bad about how it went down for the Nuggets. But, I guess it is a little reaffirming to say, well, admittedly, the better team, at least according to the regular season numbers, won.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see that. And I think I was telling you before the show, Dre, that I've been disrespecting Portland for years now. So it'd be fitting if they take down Golden State in the finals and get revenge on me. But yeah, I mean, it's funny how the playoff Game 7s go, right? Because these were two pretty evenly matched teams. They played the whole regular season, they played the whole playoffs to Game 7. So what we like to say is it's not, if you're have clutch shooting or whatever. It's really just kind of a coin flip at the end, right? And that's what happened. Like, these games were so close, and this was an epic series. And I will not forget this series for a long time.
And of course, that losing that game, game 3, the quadruple overtime, by essentially a bloop 3 and 2 missed free throws is just going to be killer forever. This does make me happy, sad, I guess, in that we can now add the following to the Denver Nuggets resume. The Denver Nuggets are the only team in Colorado of the major 4 sports that has not made a finals. The Denver Nuggets are the only former ABA team that's active that has not made an NBA finals. The Denver Nuggets, I think, are one of the few teams. Actually, I might be wrong. I might have misunderstood it. I think the situation was with Toronto. I think they were up 2-1, lost game 3 and 4, and that team never loses the NBA finals, where I believe the Denver Nuggets were down 1-2. So not as bad, but, obviously a Game 7 loser with home court, that's pretty rare and kind of sad. And, just the reality is, like, basically I get to be pissed. And this follows, right? Enes Kanter in Game 7 plays 40 minutes, 6 for 13, 13 rebounds. We get to nail it in both cases, where you were kind of down on the Portland Trailblazers, your logic being you weren't sure if Nurkic was for real, but your counter was, we know Enes Kanter is for real. They got him from the New York Knicks. Sorry, I almost said Nets. New York Knicks, and that he's the difference. I mean, if you pull off Nurkic's and Kanter's regular season numbers, it's not even close. And I thought the Nuggets had a guaranteed win. I thought whoever was playing Portland was just a guaranteed win after Nurkic went down, and holy cow, has Kanter been clutch.
Yeah, and also everyone thought Oklahoma City was going to take care of business against Portland in the first round. So I guess I'm not the only one disrespecting them, but Game 7 aside, Lillard is really taken a step forward the past season or two. Like, we kind of thought he was maybe a fake star when he was a little bit younger, but he is a real legit star now.
I have liked Lillard his entire career, and basically we kind of said he's really good at threes. Maybe he should take more threes. And the good news about the advent of Morey Ball is he is taking more threes. I apologize because, obviously, since I was sick to a degree and then also out depressed, I don't have much to say. My more meta take about this series, and even people saying stuff at the end about, missed plays or whatever, or one team wanting it more, which will get us into our next series, is when it's this close, like you were saying at the beginning, Brian, it's a coin flip. One of my favorite stats I bring up is there's a book called The Drunkard's Walk. It's about statistics. And it says if you have a 2/3 favorite team in the NBA playoffs, or any playoff system, right, a best of 7, with statistical significance, meaning 95% of the time you get the outcome you want, you would need to play a best of 25 series. There is not time to do that. So as soon as we get to a best of 7 series with one game on the line deciding it all, there you can nitpick, but the honest truth, and this is what I always say about data, is there's times where we get into data analysis. Batter versus pitcher in baseball is a prime example. How well a specific batter does against a specific pitcher. Or, in basketball, so-and-so shuts down Kobe Bryant. You go, well, how many plays does that player actually end up on Kobe? How much do they impact a shooting percentage? And what variance would we just expect in Kobe's shooting performance, meaning we can't decide if that's true or not. So with all of those things in mind, that's my meta-analysis on the Denver Nuggets versus Portland Trailblazers is one game. I'm not going to nitpick any individual play. I didn't even watch it live, and obviously knowing the outcome, it's very funny. I'm not going to rewatch it. I don't have it in me. I was listening to an autobiography of Dr. J, and one of the things that happened is the Denver Nuggets, their best chance of winning a finals, not the NBA, but the ABA finals, was against Dr. J. I believe they were the favorite, and he took them down. And when he was recounting that series, I almost wanted to, turn the book off and throw my phone away. So it's like I don't have it in me to watch the Denver Nuggets lose. I've never rewatched the Los Angeles Lakers series. But, just good on the team. And, really for next season, I hope they give Monte Morris more burn. I was a little shocked by that. It'll be really interesting to see what they do with Paul Millsap. There's no way in hell they can, expect to pay him that $30 million. We should be really thrilled that we have Nikola Jokic. He's amazing. I'm somewhat optimistic for the squad, and we'll just have to see where it goes. And while I can certainly nitpick some, optimizations. We didn't mention our sponsor, Brian. I forgot. I've just been kind of out of it. Our sponsor of the show, this is the organic tie-in, is sunshower.io. They're a cloud computation resource that helps you set up a cloud solution and optimize it so you're not spending too much, because it turns out most people, when they set up a cloud solution, something on Heroku, on Amazon, there are lots of different places. You put a solution on the cloud and you've got all sorts of resources. Most people misallocate it and waste money. So sunshower.io helps you optimize that. So check out sunshower.io/nerd numbers. That lets them know we sent you and helps keep the lights on over here at the podcast. But what I was going to say about that is, I can certainly look at the Denver Nuggets allocation in this playoffs and even the regular season and say I'd really like to reallocate stuff. And, admittedly, there were some small places that hurt. But I guess all I can really say is Portland really lucked out with Enes Kanter becoming available. The Denver Nuggets backcourt just wasn't as strong. And when it came out to the players that the Portland Trailblazers were able to give more minutes to in the playoffs, they won over the Nuggets. And just good job on the Nuggets. I'll plenty of off-season time to be negative about their moves, allocation, etc. I'm just going to say, hell of a series. It is, as Brian already said, it is an all-timer. But let's go to an even bigger all-timer. I'm surprised we're giving the second billing, Brian, but that's my call as the host, I guess.
Yeah.
Toronto. Anybody that said what they gave up for Kawhi was wrong is wrong. Kawhi wills the Toronto Raptors into a conference finals. Now, admittedly, here's what's funny, Brian. That game was not good. I saw some people noting, if you're the type of nerd, and we are that type of nerd, that wants to go to Twitter and say, if you want to be proud of Kawhi for getting 40 in this game, but then you have to point out he took 39 shots, what's wrong with you? That is what's wrong with us. He did not play a good game, but he did get the triple bounce, buzzer beater to win in regulation. And like I said, the numbers I'm shocked that the series lined up this much, because the numbers basically said with the players they played, the Toronto Raptors had a razor-thin margin above the Philadelphia 76ers. And it's true. That happened. They won. And Kawhi in this playoffs is ridiculous. I looked this up today, Brian. I made a tweet about it. In the regular season, Kawhi's true shooting percentage, 60.5%. Holy cow. In the playoffs, including that stinker of a game, 65%. Holy cow, is Kawhi amazing. I saw some people, I can't even remember who, it was a response to a response. So basically there was some Sports Center analysis bashing Ben Simmons for being unable to defend Kawhi. And that play was brutal because Kawhi took the exact type of shot you want him to take, a mid-range jumper. He took that shot with Ben Simmons' hand all over his face with time running out. And obviously it was not a good shot, right? It was not nothing but net. Remember back in the day when Paul Pierce had that game winner and someone said, did you call glass? And his response was, I called game. It's like, you could look at Kawhi and go like, did you call 3 bounce? And he's going to say no. That is one of the funnier memes. Have you seen this, Brian? In the press, it's where they ask him. They go up to Kawhi. They're like, oh, by the way, that is the first Game 7 buzzer beater in NBA playoffs history. And Kawhi, robot Kawhi, no response. It was amazing.
Yeah, good old Kawhi. I might, share a laugh with him, so I better be careful in bashing him. But I agree with you. I mean, the shot was amazing, and it was a great end of the game. But the series itself, yeah. Well, let me just make this statement.
Let's give hats off to the series, though. That was a Game 7 series in the Eastern Conference semifinals is great. And it was like the key point to historical Game 7s we've seen or series that went interesting like LeBron James is this was not a team playing over their heads. This was legitimately that's what amazed me when I ran all these numbers before the show, Brian. This is what was supposed to happen. So that you got to give hats off to that.
All my point though is like this was a grinding series, and all the non-Bucks series were grinding. And here's what I mean by that. I have the basketball reference pages open for all 4 of these series, and right at the top, right, they have the 4 factors, and pace is right up front. The pace of this series was 94. That is like really slow.
Holy cow, that's like 1960s
Yeah,
era?
this is like the 90s. Okay, so maybe this is a slow-paced series. Let's go to the next one here. Golden State versus Houston. 94.8 pace, slightly higher. You think, God, these teams are really, they like to run up and down. No, this was also a grinding series. Let's go to the third series, Portland versus Denver. 92.8 is the pace of that series. So all three of these series that were not the Bucks, which were, by the way, over 100, 102.9, these were really slow-paced series, and that probably benefited the lower seeds. And it is kind of hearkening me back to the 90s. Like, they're just running their starters out there for 40 or 50 or more minutes if it's an overtime game. Just let him get really tired, and they're not moving around very much on offense, but playing very, very hard on defense, right? So that's kind of what all three of these series has reminded me of.
Let's give a few thoughts. One thing that was interesting to me, and I don't know how true this is. We always have to take breaking rumors or whatever on NBA Twitter with a grain of salt, because obviously the way the NBA works is you're not really allowed to be upfront with the media with things such as like free agents you'd like and coaches you'd like, right? You're supposed to ask for permission. So what NBA teams have learned is the trick is you anonymously spread a rumor to a mainstream beat writer, and they'll spread it for you. So sometimes we'll hear things and we don't know if that's a true rumor or if it's a leaked rumor to try and help something out. But a leaked rumor is that Brett Brown was basically told if they lost Game 7, he was fired, which is utterly, utterly, utterly baffling to me if that's true. I just cannot for the life of me understand it. They kept him around after 4 seasons of this team. And admittedly, the team was tanking, but they kept him around after 4 seasons of that. This is back-to-back 50-win seasons. And this is very much, if you remember with like LeBron James back in the day when Boston got that bullshit trade for Kevin Garnett, and, it was Cleveland's turn, and then out of nowhere, a new challenger has arrived. Boston gets Kevin Garnett, and they go on to win the NBA Finals. Toronto getting Kawhi really did change everything up. And now, admittedly, Philadelphia did everything they could, getting Jimmy Butler and getting Tobias Harris. Now, it is interesting. So the Tobias Harris trade is fascinating to me because he did have a fairly weak playoffs. And I don't know what to say on that. And then also the problem with Tobias Harris was the classic, what are we going to do with him in the offseason? Are we going to give him the money or not? And I believe, I'm going to just try and look this up real quick, Brian. I don't know how well he played with Philadelphia, but I don't know. I mean, he did not play great. And especially if you're playing him as a power forward, I don't know what to say about that. So that is a rough one, where the trade for Tobias Harris I thought was a smart gamble if you were going to play him as a small forward, and I don't know if it paid off. Jimmy Butler was obviously the best player in that series, so that's huge. But I don't know why you would consider firing Brett Brown after this. You obviously have some hard decisions next season. J.J. Redick, Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler. What are you going to do with all those players? But the rest of the team, the team and coaching, I'm, for the most part, pretty happy with. So I don't know what to say there.
Yeah, I mean, I hear complaints about Brown's, in-game adjustments and whatnot. And, I'm not a coach, so that's opaque to me. So I'll let people say what they want about that. But if it were me, making the decision to fire Brett Brown or not, I would just go talk to Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. And if they like him and they want to play hard defense for him, which it seemed like they did want to do this season, let's keep him around. Like, why would you want to get rid of the guy your stars like? But if they don't like him, if they've lost confidence in him, maybe they need to let him. Maybe they need to let him go.
Yeah, that's the question: is who leaked it and what? And I mean that squad for years now, they've been one of our favorite soap opera dramas, right? With all the behind the scenes stuff going on, we don't know who leaked what. Obviously, Elton Brand is a relatively new GM, so there's probably blood in the water for people that want his job. So. NBA politics, there's already weird office politics in normal jobs. The NBA just ramps up to 11, so I don't know what's going on there. But I mean, that's my take. Is like, you shouldn't be that upset with this team. Everything went pretty well, and they just lost to a marginally better team. And for what it's worth, right, though, in the playoffs, Philadelphia was ranked third best of all the teams in this round based on who they played. And they just ran into the unfortunate luck of being ranked number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we mentioned this last week. If Embiid had been healthy, things might have been different. So health is just so important in the playoffs.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Last series, Brian, I actually had an article idea for this and then just didn't get to it because I was sick, but I was going to call it the anti-money balling Rockets. So Golden State managed to hold on for a win despite losing Kevin Durant. And I believe the news about Kevin Durant is it's probably at least until Game 5 that he returns against
He's
Portland.
missing game 1 and 2 for sure. And yeah, game 5 seems more likely.
Now, the good news is before, you've seen this in the past where Portland had, I believe, Curry and one other player injured on the Warriors, and the Warriors still managed to hold on. And I even looked at it and said if you replaced Kevin Durant with a zero player, they were only marginally worse than Portland. And the good news about the Warriors is they do have, they have like Kevon Looney, Jordan Bell. They do what was there? I did not pay close enough attention, Brian, but what rotation do they basically go with Sans Durant?
Yeah, the narrative, and I pretty much agree with it, is they decided we're going to turn back the clock to the 2015 Warriors. And because most of those players are still around, right? So they just threw Bogut into the starting lineup
Oh,
with
love it.
the rest of the, what the Hamptons Five, which was literally the 2015, lineup. So they just went back to that. Bogut still doesn't play a ton of minutes, of course, even though he starts. But yeah, it's basically a big dose of Looney, and Looney is just really, really good. He's a much different player than Durant, obviously. He's not as tall or good on offense, but he's excellent on defense, and he can still pass and, offensive rebound and score inside. So he's a great player, to fit in with what the Warriors have, and I think they'll be fun. I mean, you can't you can't overstate the importance of Durant. He really is one of the best players of all time. But Patrick got this right about the Durant signing when it happened. Even if there's, as they like to say, not enough balls for everyone to shoot all the shots they need to take, it protects from injury, right? So, with Curry and Durant, if one or the other is hurt, the other is still there, can just take more shots. That is such a big deal for them. And then to have all these defensive role players on the bench, they can be, even guys like Jerebko aren't that bad. I don't see them having much trouble handling Portland.
I will say on paper, the good news is even with, say, 25% Durant, I haven't done the calculations. Even with 25% Durant, the Warriors are probably the favorite. And there's a good chance this seems to happen. So we'll see if the Blazers get baited. If the Warriors are playing more small, they might play less Cantor, and Cantor was the edge. I get to be freaking frustrated. I mean, I guess it's recompense for trading Melo back in the day, but no Cantor, and the Portland Trail Blazers aren't even close to the Nuggets. Cantor was amazing, and he was amazing in Game 7. So really, for the next series, we're going to have to see what do the Blazers do with Cantor. And even if they play him as many minutes as they were playing against the Nuggets, the Warriors are arguably on paper still a better team.
Yeah, they might go to Zach Collins instead, who's, again, we talked about him last week, a young player that we liked who hasn't really stepped up yet in the NBA. He seems to be doing it now. So he's a guy that's probably a little more mobile, that can go outside a little bit more. So maybe they'll go to him, or maybe they'll do something ridiculous. Try to be like the Rockets and put a Minu center or something. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. But I mean, Houston just kind of had the same problem, right? Chris Paul is amazing. James Harden's amazing. Capella at times, even though he didn't get as much run in this series every game necessarily. They just didn't have the horses or the guns or whatever, analogy you want to use to beat the Warriors.
I'll at least get it on air, and then I hope to maybe turn it into a piece, Brian, if I get time this week. But this was my Moneyball story. So a primary story in the book and movie Moneyball is that I forget the other player, but basically the Oakland A's lose Jason Giambi, who's a legitimate MVP caliber player, and another player who's, we'd call a yay points player, an overrated player. So they lose these two big names in free agency, and the team has to go, how do we recreate the production of our star players, given that we know we can't sign them on the free market? We have to be frugal and sign cost-effective players to kind of recreate a star player out of pieces. The Rockets are funny because they're the opposite position, right? They have James Harden and Clint Capella. CP3 is older, so that's a rough one. But, they have this core of star players, and you just go, you've got a core of star players. All you have to do is put together, albeit frugally, a bunch of role players that are productive. And this team did not. Eric Gordon is the worst player, has to be the worst starter in the playoffs so far.
Yeah.
And I'd like to look historically. Now, there was a point in time when Eric Gordon, we might have called him a Derek Fisher player. And I've said this before a lot. Essentially, back in the day when the Lakers were rolling, even during their second run, they started Derek Fisher. Derek Fisher wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible. He basically was a good enough player to keep you through. And C.J. McCollum, even though he did help destroy the Nuggets, honestly, but C.J. McCollum's a similar boat where we would say he's an overpaid player, but his production is fine that as long as you have a couple stars, Lillard and Nurkic or Lillard and Cantor, you're fine. Now, so that was basically the point, is that you just need good enough players. And in his prime, Eric Gordon might have been that player, but he is terrible now. Austin Rivers has never been that player. Iman Shumpert has never been that player. So the Warriors, they have 3 slots filled, right? Of what we would say 6. The key to the playoffs is to optimize 6 positions. Your starting 5 and your Manu Ginobili player. And, you know, your Manu Ginobili player, to that point, the reason I said it that way is your Manu Ginobili player can still play a ton of minutes. So you want to optimize your top 6 for the playoffs. And the Warriors, or not the Warriors too, though, by the way, obviously with Draymond, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry. But the Rockets have a cheat code. James Harden, Chris Paul, Clint Capella. That is 3 lock. That is such an easy, now just get reasonable players in those last 3 spots. And they did not. And it was also kind of depressing. If you watch what this team did, I want to look a little more in depth. But an example, one thing that happened this offseason is the Golden State Warriors said, I always confuse the Warriors and the Rockets, Brian. I apologize. The Rockets said, we do not want to sign Trevor Ariza to $15 million for a 1-year deal, because that's what he got with Phoenix. I believe he wanted 3 years and something, and they said no. But essentially, his price tag was obviously $15 million for 1 year. Our kind of general algorithm is you want to take the NBA salary cap, and I'm looking that up right now. So you want to take the normal salary cap, you want to divide it in 2, and then whatever that number is, that would be a 50-win team, so that's what a win would be worth. I know we've done other calculations, divide the total number of wins by the total bankroll. My logic is if you want to spend the normal salary cap to get a 50-win team, so if you have $110 million to spend, that means essentially you want to spend 55, divide in 2. So that's like 55 million. Or it used to be a little easier with like 50, whatever. But anyway, I guess, sorry, I got way off track. But the point being, 15 million would mean that you would assume that Trevor Ariza was worth about 7 wins. Historically, he was. Now you could wisely say Trevor Ariza is getting older and more banged up. And this was interesting. On Phoenix, he played god-awful, but on Washington, he played close to those normal numbers. So the question is, do I want to overpay Trevor Ariza this season? And another key about Trevor Ariza, for instance, is that they have his bird rights, right? So they can sign over the cap to retain him as opposed to signing outright. Do I want to overpay Trevor Ariza for this season? And I do think there are also probably cap considerations, so it might be even higher. So the reality is you might be overpaying Trevor Ariza as much as $10 million when cap is enforced for this upcoming season. Is that worth it? They said no. And then, for instance, they picked up James Ennis, which we thought was a fantastic trade. And then they traded James Ennis at the trade deadline for like a second-round pick to get themselves below the luxury cap. So this team basically went out of their way to avoid being over the luxury cap and losing money. And what frustrates me about this is if we look at, I always drop his last name, Brian, apologies, but Tim, who writes over at The Athletic, the beat writer for the Golden State Warriors.
Tim Kawakami, yep.
Tim Kawakami wrote an article a few years back about the Warriors' playoff financials and was saying that, like, playoff games in the finals were worth like $5 to $10 million. So the point being, if you think you have a legitimate shot at getting your team to the finals, is it worth overpaying a couple role players $5 to $10 million? Yes, and that has kind of been our interesting point. Like a player, I brought this up with like players like Al Horford and even Paul Millsap, which is to say, if you're overpaying these players, is it to get yourself over the hump? Because if so, and there are no better options available, so that's one reason we might still be able to bash, say, Al Horford and Paul Millsap signing, because I'm fairly certain at the price point they went for, they were probably underrated stars that we liked that you could have probably gotten or traded for, etc. But regardless, are you willing to pay to go over the hump? And it becomes, in the modern NBA, with how those numbers are working, immensely worth it. And then Dave Barry's research back in the day has said winning a finals is really good for future attendance and ticket revenue. So the Warriors, though, apologies, the Rockets decided against doing that this season, and it cost them. It's no doubt. If you compare them in the playoffs against the Warriors, it was not even close. And that is just utterly frustrating because you just go, what this team needs to do is get rid of Eric Gordon. This team needs to just shed Eric Gordon, whatever they need to do. They need to pick up a couple of reasonable shooting guards. Shooting guard is the weakest position in the NBA. There was a point this NBA season, I'm not sure how true it was, I'm not sure the rumors, where the Houston Rockets were in talks for Jimmy Butler. And people were like, oh my God, they might have to give up as many as 4 number 1 picks. It's like, holy cow, anything outside of James Harden and Capella, I said it, was totally worth Jimmy Butler this season. So the Rockets, though, decided to go the Morey Ball story, right? They were not willing to spend money. And what's frustrating, though, is they were not willing to spend money when they had the stars. And it wasn't even that they weren't willing to spend the money. They didn't even make wise decisions. You know, they picked up Fareed, which we were happy about. I believe he played 5 minutes that series. So this Rocket squad, for as much credit as they get about analytics, this was a travesty. And we've made this joke before about the sine wave Rockets, where they'll do a good season. So last season, you know, they traded for Chris Paul. They do all this great. They signed Clint Capella. We're like, holy cow, you've got everything right. This season's their off season. So maybe next season they're going to flip, you know, Chris Paul into something amazing like Rudy Gobert. We'll see. But this was a depressing series because it was essentially the Rockets wasting a playoff window. And as I have kept saying this playoff series, the funny thing is when you look at all of the injuries to the Warriors, all of these people preseason were like, oh my goodness, the Warriors signing DeMarcus Cousins, a cheat code. Why even compete? And the Warriors got dinged up enough that there was such an open window for so many teams that, you know, the San Antonio Spurs and the Rockets should both be wildly upset. The fans of both those of teams, basically the Spurs with not being able to get Kawhi back and the Rockets with not being able to pick up Jimmy Butler, both teams should be upset.
I love your point so much, and maybe you've made that before, but I wasn't paying attention. But this is the first time I remember hearing it, which is that paying the luxury tax is not like you're setting a pile of money on fire. It's more like you're a poker player pushing your chips all in. You know, maybe you won't go to the finals and you'll lose that money. But if you do, it's just going to pay off and you'll make so much money. And like you said, it'll lead to more attendance and bigger fan base, and not to mention, you know, the per game revenue. So yeah, that's such a good point. I guess the one thing I'll say on the Rockets is, you know, we're talking about the slow pace and everything. Slow pace if you do think you're the worst team in a series, slow pace is a way to help you, right? Because less shots per game means more variance, and especially if you're a team that shoots a lot of threes, maybe that can keep you in the series. But I've said before, you know, despite that being true, the Rockets do have good enough players that they go a little too far with the grinding, right? They could try to get a few more open shots, especially people like Eric Gordon. He takes those way behind the line contested shots just like Harden and Curry do, but he shoots like 30%. So it's like, I don't know. So the Rockets are frustrating to me because they're so close to doing what they need to do, but like you said, they just failed and weren't willing to do it.
Let me ask you one last question on the series before we get onto Game of Thrones. And apologies, I don't feel bad that we're doing more Game of Thrones this show than NBA basketball. My team got eliminated. I'm trying to put on a strong face. Well, I guess Milwaukee advanced, so we'll see there. But I was going to say, what do you think on Curry's health? Because obviously he had a fantastic second half that last game, and I think he got 22 points in the fourth quarter, and he shot
23. I think he had 33 total points in the second half.
And he even shot reasonably from three. Not amazing, not as Curry levels, but 36%. So that was a very Curry-ish game. 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 turnovers, which isn't great, but that's a pretty good game. But, you know, I've been seeing images of his fingers all bandaged up and talks of his health. So obviously Curry and Durant make this series. And so the question is, how healthy do you think Curry is? Because, of course, he's going to have to shoulder the load while Durant's injured. And then if Curry and Durant come back healthy for the finals, I will say this, even this last series, they were the best team on paper.
Yeah, well, I'm a little surprised to hear that because I don't know. I've been saying since the beginning of the playoffs, I think the Bucks are just going to walk over everyone, including the Warriors, barring weird health stuff. But yeah, the Bucks do seem very healthy right now. But I will answer your question, though, which is, this is just my eye test, but I think Curry looks okay. Yeah, his hand is all bandaged up, but that's his non-shooting hand. It's his offhand. I know that affects your shot, but not as much as your shooting hand, right? And then the other injury he has is his ankle, which he's injured a million times. And that didn't seem that bad either. It wasn't that big of an ankle roll, and he seems to be moving pretty well. So I'd say his shooting is more like variance and less to do with the injuries. But yeah, I guess we'll find out. We'll find out tomorrow in Game 1.
I will say the frustrating part about the Bucks and trying to compare, because I did mention they weren't as strong, is that they really did. Let's take a look if I can get it. They won the first game by 22 points, the second game by 21 points. They won the third game by only 7. They lost the fourth they won the. Hold up, I'm getting this wrong. Oh yeah, Boston blew them out by 22. So that's the key. It was a blowout in game 1. Then they came out and blew them out. Then 7, then 12, then a huge blowout. So 3 of those games were blowouts. And so we don't get close to normal numbers, and we only saw 1 game of Malcolm Brogdon. So we don't quite know what the Bucks are. On paper, currently right now, the Raptors are the stronger squad. We're just going to have to see how that plays out, though.
And that's a good point. I'm just going based on regular season. Bucks were so good in the regular season, but your point is well taken about the playoffs.
All right, well, actually, let's just wrap that portion of the script up really quick. Let's just be foolish and do predictions. I say Golden State wins in 6. Kevin Durant putting up a triple-double in Game 6.
I'm going to say Golden State and Milwaukee Bucks will both win in 5 games. I'll go out on a limb a little bit.
I'm going to give that to you.
I almost said Bucks in 4, but I respect Kawhi.
No way. I don't believe that. If it happens, though, good luck. All right, we're going to get to Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones spoilers are officially lifted. There's a lot to discuss. We'll see how long we go because very much like the playoffs, I was kind of I'll phrase it this way. We'll start with the first thing. I liked Clegane Bowl.
Yes, me too. I loved it.
I was underwhelmed on a lot of the rest of the episode. And we were talking the reasons for why people were upset with this get interesting. But I was going to ask this point about this. Did you get a Princess Bride vibe off of the Clegane Bowl portion of the episode?
Oh, that's super interesting. Qyburn is kind of a Princess Bride style character, and he featured prominently. So I guess not, but I'd love to hear your theory about this.
So a reminder, in Princess Bride, Mandy Patinkin plays the Spaniard who's had a lifelong revenge thing. And so
I see.
He's going to kill the six-fingered man. And, he's going through and, there's at one point, one of the things that got to me is, Queen Cersei, the Mountain, and Qyburn are all escaping, and there are 4 guards in front of them. And they come up, and the Hound just mows down those 4 guards. And there is a scene very similar to that in Princess Bride where the Spaniard just mows down a group of guards trying to get to the six-fingered man. The funny part about the scene in the movie, though, is the six-fingered man actually bolts, so he doesn't stay around. Whereas what happened in this is, Qyburn, the Mountain goes to fight the Hound. Qyburn says, obey your queen. She says, stay by me, and then he kills Qyburn. So that was a very fitting end to Qyburn, actually. So that was one reason. This episode had a lot of the deaths we've been expecting, and what I'll say is they just were not as satisfying as they could have been, whereas the Mountain Hound, I believe both are dead. I'm not 100% sure if we...
They fell off of the edge of a tower into a giant burning inferno, but we didn't see them die, so...
Yeah, and who knows on the mountain. So not 100% certain on that, but I'm just saying... This was one of the fulfilling deaths of the episode, and the Princess Bride, the Spaniard fighting for revenge, and then eventually ending up against the six-fingered man. And then, there was that scene where, he stabs him through the center. The Hound stabs the Mountain through the center, and he does it. And then the Mountain's holding him up, and it's just oh no, not for nothing. He really tried, but then he manages to come back. So that's the reminder. The Princess Bride beat was... mows down a bunch of guys trying to find the guy, eventually ends up in a battle with them, looks like he's going to lose, and it's oh, come on, don't lose, and then he triumphs at the end. The difference being the Spaniard lives and has something to live for, whereas, the Hound dies, although the similarity to the Princess Bride there is that the Hound tells Arya, my entire life has been about vengeance. You don't want to be like me. I'm about to go off and die, and I know that you've got stuff to live for. And she leaves. And then, of course, like Princess Bride, if you don't recall, the end of the Princess Bride is the heroes all escaping on a bunch of white horses that show up magically, right. And Arya rides off on a white horse. So that plot story felt very Princess Bride-y to me. So there you go.
Yeah, we'll see what the white horse ends up meaning. I mean, most obvious is the pale horse means death in the Bible. That's what everyone's saying. So I don't think Arya actually died in that scene. She's probably still alive, but maybe it just means the death around her. Who knows?
Interesting. I hadn't got that. So I've been playing a little Final Fantasy VIII recently, and one
Nice.
of my favorite theories that I've heard, I'd never heard this before until I obviously looked up some, spoilers and, how to optimize things. And there is a scene in the game very early on where you're trying to kill the evil sorceress, and she throws a blue spear through you. And I think it's like an ice spear or something. And your character falls from a really high distance and then wakes up and you're in prison and all that. And the theory is he's dead. And this is all just, a
Oh.
last second vision. That's why everything goes so off the rails and everything. And up there are a bunch of character beat changes and all that. So that's an interesting theory. So I hadn't thought about that, where with Arya, it's like, yeah, my theory on Arya is she's done. We're not going to see her in the last episode. And yeah, that actually adds a little possible nuance or whatever to that take, which is to say Arya does die, but she kind of, walks off with a pale horse. I did not remember that illusion.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? She'll probably play some role, but oh man, there's so much to talk about, Dre. I don't know where you want to go with this, but
I had a big overarching theory, a meta commentary, which is one of my favorites, Brian, which I'm going to put this series into the same category as Lost and Battlestar Galactica, and then compare it to Babylon 5, which is Battlestar Galactica and Lost had very controversial, and the fans are very divided on the finales. And the way I viewed those shows, I said, these shows are really soap operas, telenovela. We've compared to wrestling all the time. Wrestling is essentially a soap opera with a really weird theme. But when you have these shows that just basically continue, and you have all of these heel turns and face turns, a reminder again, in wrestling parlance, a heel is the villain, a face or baby face is the hero, and a heel turn or face turn is when a hero turns into a villain, and vice versa. In soap operas, you just have these stories that go on forever, and the way that they keep themselves going is they have a bunch of heel and face turns. This person was a villain, they become the hero. This person was a hero, they become the villain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they are meant to continue forever. And if you basically hop in at any given point and kind of extrapolate backwards in time, you're like, this character makes no sense. Triple H and WWE, the storylines he's followed, you're like, oh my goodness, what? And the same happens on a lot of, Battlestar Galactica, a great show on this. Like, Admiral Adama's son has switched sides so many times you don't know what the hell is going on. But it's when you force an ending, and obviously people expect series finales to have a lot of closure and wrap up. And so I think that's the problem a lot of people have with shows like Lost and Battlestar Galactica, which are essentially soap operas. And when you try and force a soap opera to end cleanly, what you have to be honest with yourself, for instance, in Game of Thrones, you're like, how many times has Jaime Lannister switched? Whose side is he on? What's going on? Like, is Tyrion smart? Is he stupid? What is Dany good? Is she bad? We don't know, because to keep the story going, we've had a lot of stuff going on like that. Babylon 5 was one of the first shows where the creator came up with an arc ahead of time and had a very set vision in mind. And so that made it so it was able. Now, the funny part about that is what happened with Babylon 5. He had a 5-year arc in line. He thought he was going to get canceled till he wrapped up the arc. Very similar, by the way, to Game of Thrones. He wrapped up the arc in 4 seasons instead of 5, and they renewed him for a 5th season. What I think he should have done in that 5th season is start a new arc. What he chose to do is kind of wrap up the arc again. So it kind of started up and stopped again, and you're like, this was kind of a bummer. And for Game of Thrones, I think it's the same problem. I view it more as a soap opera that's being forced to end. It's also, this is Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners. They were offered 10 episodes to wrap the season up. They said they only wanted 6, so they have rushed a lot of things. So I think, first off, trying to wrap up Game of Thrones, which has all of these face and heel turns and all that, is hard to begin with. 2, they're rushing it too quickly. And so that's kind of the overall meta point I wanted to make about this, is I think there was no way anybody was going to be happy with this, because you can't really close off these characters that have had such tumultuous arcs over the course of 7 seasons. You can't really wrap them up easily, and forcing you to do so is going to make people unhappy. And we've already seen this before with Lost and Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, I agree with the second part you said, definitely. The first part, I'm not as sure, just because, and we don't know, maybe we'll find out at some point, but I'm guessing Martin wrote the Daenerys heel turn 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe more. That's probably been the ending for a long, long time. But the second point is totally right, too. Benioff and Weiss, yeah, the pacing the last couple seasons, way too fast, right? It seems like they're just getting through it. And if Martin was still in the picture as an executive producer, maybe they would have done it differently. So now, but this is great for Martin, right? Now people are definitely going to buy the books, and see if he did things
I've got a
differently.
really weird meta point on that too, which is like we've been in these boats. Like you're at a company and you have a project, and maybe you leave to find another job. At least I have. I've had this scenario where you're in charge of a project, you get hired by another job, you wrap up, you go, hey, by the way, here's where I'm at, do whatever you need to. Or certainly you've come into a company that's had a similar situation. Someone was working on a project, we still want to complete the project, they've left. And the metaphor I'd give for like George R. R. Martin's case is you could say he's got stock in the company. So, right, if the project is successful, he makes money. So it's still really beneficial for him for the project to be successful, but he's no longer associated with it. It'd be really weird if the project completed, made a lot of money for the company, you gave the stock options to George R. R. Martin, and then said, hey, do you want to come back and finish this project that's already finished, already paid for? And that's the funny thing to me is, when George R. R. Martin was completing the fourth book, this was funny. I was writing my master's thesis and I was really dilly-dallying on it. And I was getting into a joke of like, who was going to finish first, George R. R. Martin or me? And I crushed him, by the way. He took forever on that fourth book. But I also got to the point where I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to finish my master's thesis. I was this close to it, right? I was this close to it, so there was no reason not to. All I had to do was complete a paper, and if I completed a paper, I get my degree, and if I don't complete the paper, I don't get my degree. There's no reason not to. But if I'd been a year earlier in my process, I might have said, I don't really feel like finishing my master's degree. There's other stuff out there for me to do right now, and I'd rather go do that. And that happens all the time in grad school, and those people are wise. Listen to those people. The people that leave grad school and go into industry and get paid, listen to them. They're right. Unless you're like me, where you're this close to finishing a master's thesis.
I think I've heard you say this, Dre, but I've heard a million other people say it too. You need to treat grad school as a job, not as a school, as a class.
That would be true, and had I done that, I would have finished a lot earlier. There's also other weird thoughts I've had, like if Grammarly had existed when I was in grad school, if the Technology Chord podcast had existed. A funny thing that happened at the very end of my grad school career is my advisor got a snowball speaker and would record our meetings with each other. We basically podcast our thesis updates. And then so 2 days later, I would listen to the podcast, and that made my writing go a lot better because instead of scribbled notes in a notebook that I waited 2 or 3 days to look at, that I'm like, what did we mean by update the eigenvalues? What is this here? K-folds, cross-validation. I had the full conversation. So I also think if the technology had been a little further along in my grad school, I would have gone farther, might have gone back for a PhD, but it is what it is. But all I'm saying to George R. R. Martin is it's really weird to all these people are like, don't you want to finish the books? And then I think he even said that he finished a draft and didn't like it. So I think the funny thing is, George R. R. Martin's almost admitting, he's saying, I had this big sprawling outline that I handed off to Benioff and Weiss. I handled the first half of it amazing. Then he, even when he started getting into it, went, oh, holy crap, this is harder than I thought it was. And we've seen that before, like Harry Potter. I know something that's interesting is there are lots of fan theories, basically, that Neville Longbottom should have been the chosen one, that Hermione really didn't belong with Ron. These kind of theories that popped up were going, when you were writing this initially, you had this long outline in your head, but if you really examined it, you might change things up. So I think with George R. R. Martin, the rough part is someone else completed it, and it's like it's hard for me to say to him, you really should want to do that. I mean, even if you're saying he can make a ton of money, he's with the sales of his books and the show, I've got to imagine he's already set. So it's kind of
he's not going to finish the books? Oh, I think he'll try at least.
I wouldn't. I'm saying, man. I'm going, if someone picked up my project, even if they didn't do it to the level I wanted it to, and I'm set for life and I can do a lot of other stuff, do the other stuff. And you've even seen that, right? There have been so many other projects that he's clearly been more invested in, and I have no fault with him. In fact, one of our favorite books, Stumbling on Happiness by Dan Gilbert, not that Dan Gilbert, a different Dan Gilbert. He talks about this weird thing where you take someone to a show or a movie or whatever, and 95% of the movie is amazing. If you were charting their happiness, they're like happy, 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 and it has a horrible ending. Or like the film gets finicky at the end and they go, oh man, I love that movie, but the ending ruined it for me. And you go, logically, from the cold calculating analyst standpoint, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You enjoyed the first 95%. That last 5% shouldn't ruin it to you. That's all I'm going to say is George R. R. Martin, if all he ever did is those first 4 books, he's given me so much happiness. But let's actually get back to the show. I've done too much meta commentary. Here is my take. Let's talk this. I had this spoiled for me, but Cersei was killed by a rock, maybe. And
that's
boo.
True. She also died off screen, but I'd say it's like 95, 99% likely her and Jaime are dead.
I would say from a narrative standpoint, the Cersei and Jaime surviving with a child with a claim to the throne, if we were continuing the story arc on, narratively makes a lot of sense because it's kind of a flip, and you can almost view it as a vicious cycle, right? The Baratheons killed off all the Lannisters and hunted down their dead, but then they missed one, and that one came back with a right to the throne. This case, right, the Targaryen returns, kills off all the Lannisters, Baratheons, whatever you want to call it, but there's one left with a claim to the throne. Narratively, that makes more sense. So I'm like, if they're going with that route, and of course they're not going to answer it, right? They're not going to answer that question. But I'm saying, in my mind, the fan theory way of saying what makes more sense, what makes a better story, them surviving makes more sense. Or at least Cersei surviving. You know, Jaime, he's been stabbed pretty bad. He's been bleeding out for a while. He shouldn't live, but if he finds a way to die to save Cersei, and Cersei's alive with a child with a claim to the throne, that's a better narrative story.
Yeah, well, here's what I'll say on Cersei, but just kind of a bigger point is, the way I've always seen Game of Thrones, and, for people who've watched this before, I've said this a million times. For me, well, okay, let's take even one more step out. We talked about this recently. George R. R. Martin got inspiration from writing Song of Ice and Fire, or Fire and Ice, I always get that backwards, from Lord of the Rings, right? But specifically from the Scourging of the Shire, the post, Mount Doom political stuff that happens in that book. So really what Game of Thrones is like, and Song of Ice and Fire is an inversion of Lord of the Rings, right? And in Lord of the Rings, we have these heroes that are good people and we root for them. And, they mostly triumph in the end. And that's, the main part of the story. And the Scourging of the Shire is this tiny thing, at the end, right? But for Game of Thrones, it's the opposite. These characters are not heroes. They're all pretty much bad people, and they always fail. Daenerys, certainly, I don't know if you have as well, but I've been rooting for this heel turn for a long time. And I think it's...
Do you want to hear my metaphor on the Daenerys heel turn?
Sure.
I think it. Essentially, I view the Daenerys heel turn, or the Daenerys heel push, like the Roman Reigns face push WWE, where it's kind of going, the authors obviously wanted it. It's obviously creative's intent to do that, and they keep trying to push it, and no one's biting. And I mean, because I think that's the key. We've mentioned a lot of people on Twitter are making this note. It's going, if you don't like the execution of Daenerys' heel turn, of her deciding to just light the city on fire, that's fair. We give that to you. If you want to pretend that neither George R. R. Martin nor the show have been planting seeds for 7 years now that Targaryens are temperamental and that Daenerys has always kind of been on the, waffling on
those people are just marks, total marks.
That's the point, is if you say, I don't like how they did this, I'm fine with that. I can agree. And in fact, I do agree. But if you say, I didn't see this coming, I'm like, where have you been? So that's my take.
But just to finish up, so, Daenerys is very powerful, tries to be good, but gives up on being good. I think this was always going to be her story. Cersei, has some redeeming qualities, is interesting, and she's just evil. Jon Snow has a good heart, but he's a complete failure as a leader and always makes the wrong choices. So all these different leaders and characters just end up failing the people over and over again, and the people just end up getting slaughtered. And to me, that's a really important story. That's kind of what's going on in America today, for that matter, and in other places in the world. So I just think people are looking for heroes in this show, and there are no heroes, and that's why they're disappointed. But me, I'm looking for a train wreck, and it's a very enjoyable train wreck, so I love the show.
Well, that was one thing that George R. R. Martin was really good with, where he pointed out that there is a very real schism that we have about character versus execution, which is weird, which is to say some of the best rulers in history weren't the most morally correct people. Some of the most morally correct people weren't the best leaders. As a United States example, Jimmy Carter is, I think, an example that gets pointed to a lot, where, this is a guy that after he left office went and did a bunch of Habitat for Humanity. Unlike Trump, right? He divested himself from his peanut farm before getting to office. Swell guy, but just ineffective as a leader. And so he said that before, where, Tywin Lannister was a great one, where it's like, this guy is an asshole on every sense of the word, but every step of the way is always being shrewd and making the correct move. And also in some cases, like Tywin. So this is Tyrion Lannister's father, Tyrion, Jaime, and Cersei's father, who was killed by Tyrion early on in the show. And Varys, these are two people that are very manipulative, but in theory, they're always looking for the good of the realm first. And so it's a weird one where you're like, these people are kind of evil, but they're doing the right thing. Whereas you have these people, you have the Robb Starks, the Ned Starks, the Jon Snows or whatever, where you're like, they're trying to do the correct moral thing. I stand by my queen. Robb Stark, same thing. I had sex with you and you have a kid, so I've got to marry you. Ned Stark, I've got to tell you before, I've got to give you a chance to, flee before, reporting you. These characters try and do the right thing and it just fails miserably, and then things end up worse than had they done the unethical thing. So that's always been the fun part of the show, and I think you're right, where it's not even black and white on heroes or villains. It's going, if you want a hero to succeed, that hero is usually, in complicated matters, going to have to deal with morally questionable choices, and how they deal with them is rough.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see what happens at the end of the series, but again, I just see no heroes here at all. As much as people like Jon Snow, I'm sorry, like he screws it up every time. I want to talk about Cersei though, because last week we ended saying we're Team Cersei. We want her to win in the end.
Still Team Cersei, right, Brian? Because I'm still saying she's alive with the kid.
You might be still, but what's more likely to have happened is that. I consider this to be a plot twist almost, which was Cersei appeared to be very strong. And, whatever, episode 4 aside, I think even before that we thought she was going to be strong. And her just being 100% weak and kind of mentally broken down, I thought was a big plot twist. And it was an effective one, because what Game of Thrones is really just about power in the end, right? Politics and power. And Cersei was extremely powerful in the show until all of a sudden she wasn't. She was very weak and just crumbled. And to me, like, that's okay. So people are sad. She's a good character. She should have had a better story arc. Yeah, maybe. But to me, the show is just about power and failure. And that happened to her.
It was interesting, I will say, in terms of the subversion of prophecy. And you were saying you were kind of just you were hoping we'd get more closure on the Night King, and I said you probably weren't. In the books, there's so many prophecies about Cersei, about Dany, about Jon, as we even mentioned about the Night King. And Cersei was supposed to be killed by, actually that's interesting. Did they just muck it up? Because I think the book said that she was going to die. Oh man, they could have done it better. She was supposed to die suffocating with her brother's arms around her throat. Oh. So if that's how he wrote it, that's actually a poignant scene, but that's not how they filmed it. Because I believe with Cersei, one of her Cersei prophecies, it says she's supposed to die to her brother, and it's supposed to be with her hands around her throat. And actually, I guess technically that might have happened, so who knows. But, they didn't really close a lot of the prophecies up that well this season and don't seem to care about it, which is what it is. I guess it's funny where there's something interesting about just timing and people liking things. So Game of Thrones, it's odd where I'm not seeing it as the best thing ever, but just everybody's watching and there's something to that.
Yeah, I think history will be kinder to this episode than people are on the internet right now. For those reasons I was just mentioning before. It's here, so we were talking about this before the show. I don't think we've said it on the show yet. I think that the people that are upset are mostly not upset about the executioners like we were talking about, and they're definitely there. I think people are mostly upset about the plot decision to have Daenerys turn heel, and big time heel, like it's not even close, right? And that's the part where I diverge with the other fans on. Like that's what I think should have happened, and I thought they did it very well, and the episode was very well done.
Sure, I'll let you have that. I don't agree. All right, I forgot.
Oh, you're going to tell me why?
Like I said, the reality is it wasn't. I lean with the effectiveness, and I think part of that is just the number of episodes they gave themselves. I thought that the arc ending to the Hound and Mountain was done well, But I thought the arc ending to Cersei and Jaime was underwhelming. The arc ending to Dany so far that we've seen, right, and Varys was underwhelming.
Okay, well, let's stop with Cersei and Jaime. What more did you want out of them? Because what I'm saying is them just being weak and miserable at the end was fitting, but you wanted more, it sounds like.
Again, and what's funny is a lot of this does boil down to pacing and saying that they're just, when you have plot points you have to hit and you just hit them and you don't give the audience a reason to be emotionally invested. That was kind of the problem with Jaime, where he goes north and he's gonna, he's with Breen, and then he comes back to see Cersei and all this. It's just like it all happens so quick that you don't even have time to digest or get a sense of what he's feeling. The same thing is true with Dany. Her heel turn, she's just lost all of, how am I dropping their name? Khal Drogo's army.
Oh, the Dothrakis.
She's just lost all the Dothraki. She's just lost one of her other dragons. No one loves her, even though she saved them from the Night King. There's all of this, stuff rising. We don't get any time to breathe on that. And so as a result, when she turns, you kind of think about it. So it's an interesting one.
So I take it on the execution, but anything on the substance of it, should have been a different end.
I think you and I are on the same boat, which is to say, from a narrative perspective, none of the points that they hit did not follow narratively. And I'll phrase it in another way, too, to be nice, are not things that given to either a better or I would argue, this is a funny thing. Let's note this. George R. R. Martin wright's been writing these books forever, and they're taking way, way longer than he thought they would. And, he hands them off to the showrunners and whatever. And the showrunners, they're like, we'll give you as much time as you want. And they're like, we just want to be done. It is fair to, I think there's a very interesting point where people watching, and this was the exact same point I made about Kevin Durant actually last week. Kevin Durant, comparing him to Kevin Smith and Adam Sandler, and actually I get to give some more props to this. So Adam Sandler, did you see the Chris Farley tribute? It's on his special, on the Netflix special, and he redid it.
No, I heard about it though.
And SNL got huge, and it's a great tribute. And Adam Sandler's special on Netflix got 100% fresh, and everybody was like, holy cow, where did this come from? And what you can do is, if you look at Adam Sandler, you say, Adam Sandler obviously a while ago, maybe a decade plus ago in his career, made the decision, I want to make fun movies that make money with my friends in fun locations to film it. And he's done that, right? All of the films he's made, he hires his friends. They're in very sunny locations. He has a blast. And you go, these aren't, you could make great movies. You are intelligent enough. You are funny enough to make amazing movies. By the way, on SNL, he had a joke thing. And he said his movies have made $4+ billion. And I looked it up just to check him. I think he might have been referring to Happy Madison, his production company. But Adam Sandler's movies collectively, movies he's been in, have grossed over $5 billion worldwide. So holy cow,
he's made a lot of movies.
Made a lot of movies, and those movies have made a lot of money. But you say to him, don't you want the heartache and stress and drama and emotion of making these really well-made movies that everybody gives 100%? And he can go, no, I just want to make money and have a good career. And so with both George R. R. Martin and Benioff and Wife, it almost seems clear that this show is very taxing to make, even if you don't make it as well as people would like. And so I guess I'll give it that. So my complaint is really needed more time to breathe. And both so far, both people that have taken up the reins of writing this show or book or whatever you want to call it, have basically gotten worn out towards the end and been like, listen, I want to stop writing this. Oh my goodness. So I'll give that to them.
Now, that's fair. So I cut you off, but you're going to go on to Daenerys, I think.
I know. I was saying I agree that the plot point on all of those people, it flowed, and that could be the story could be handled well and written correctly, and that maybe the thing is that these authors have just gotten burned out, and I have no fault. And so, if you, like I said, if you want to point at the show and say the execution is poor or the writing is bad or whatever, fine, I'll give it to you. But if you want to say the narrative plot points this episode hit don't make sense, I don't agree.
Yeah, and just to wrap up my point, I think the show is about something different than what most of the fans who don't like it think it's about. So that's where I diverge.
There's a fantastic college humor about Rick and Morty fans, where it was said so many Rick and Morty fans don't understand the thesis of the show. And one place I'll give Rick and Morty credit, as opposed to say Stephen Colbert, satire, is Rick and Morty very explicitly has characters that we know are the moral good characters explain why Rick is not a hero, what Rick's flaws are, how he's not perfect. And so the show goes out of its, there are people where you're like, it's satire, and you go, well, like Wolf of Wall Street is an example I've heard. You're like, people are like, this is supposed to show this horrible person. And you go, yeah, but by showing it through his lens, he looks awesome. And there's no real way around that. Whereas Rick and Morty, I would argue, does have characters come out and say, Rick, you are a bad person. And the fans will sympathize with Rick and go, he's awesome. And they go, the show tells you why he's not. And so with Game of Thrones, I think you're right, where there are people that are like, John can do no wrong. And it's like, this show has shown repeatedly how decisions he makes backfired him because he doesn't handle them correctly. They have not painted him as a brilliant tactician. He died, right? He had to get Deus Machina back from the dead. They have not, same thing with Dany. In the book, she tries to be this great loving ruler and repeatedly fails at it. It's like, I agree. You are so right there.
So I guess there's kind of two things I really want to see to end the series. First, more with Bran, like what are his motivations? Why didn't he tell everyone King's Landing was going to get burned and about the Night King and all that? I'll probably get let down there, but maybe not. That's something I want to see. The other thing is Daenerys. And so here's, I think, a potential big criticism of this episode that we don't know if it's true or not yet, which is one way to interpret her rampage is that basically Jon Snow rejected her romantically again, and that caused her to go on a rampage. That's kind of a sexist trope, right? So I hope that ends up not being the reason why. And what I mean by that is it's like the Mad King or Mad Queen story that they always talk about. What I'm rooting for it to happen with her is more of the Walter White Breaking Bad. And Breaking Bad is the end of the series that everyone loves. And one of my favorite parts about the end was throughout the series, Walter White is always talking bullshit to his wife and lying to her and saying, oh yeah, I'm just doing this all for you guys, and trying to justify what he's doing morally, right? But by the end he says, no, that was all a lie. I'm doing it for myself and I understand what I'm doing here. And it was a really powerful moment, right? So that's what I'm hoping for Daenerys, that she doesn't say, no, I'm not mad. I'm a Targaryen. I believe in power. Not to come out and say I'm evil, but to basically say this is the way to do it, right? I want her to be, lucid and sure about what she's doing in her evil.
See, my end to the show would be she wins. Like
that would be great too.
She wins, and then we just see like Cersei with her kid off somewhere. That'd be my end. That would be the last clip of the show would be something like that. Would be Daenerys sitting on the throne making some look, and then elsewhere we see Cersei sitting somewhere with a baby making a similar look, and that's the end of the show. That's Dre's end. It's not going to be. We'll probably be disappointed. But again, I already explained my logic. It's that it's really hard to wrap up soap operas, and people seem to just hate to admit that they like soap operas. It's like that's you could just keep Game of Thrones going for another 10 years, which is a bunch of other heel turns and face turns and introduce new characters. Like this is a model that has worked, and is what it is. Last thing I forgot to mention this. Someone made a Arya Old Town Thrones meme because of the horse. So take her host to the Old Town Road. That's awesome. Love it. So that person wins. Another meme I saw I thought you'd appreciate, Brian, was someone wrote, when Bran orders Arya a lift. So
oh god.
So that's why not? Anything else you want to end up on Game of Thrones?
Yeah, let's see. Let me just take a quick look here at what I got. Yeah, and I guess we covered most of it. Yeah, we can go. We've had a long show.
This week, obviously. Actually, we've had shorter relative to other weeks, but I think I pushed us a little faster, and I think also I rushed us through the NBA playoffs because I didn't want to talk about it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every Monday, usually somewhere between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can follow us live at twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers and catch recaps of the show on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. If you haven't heard Nerd Numbers enough, you're going to hear it again. Nerd Numbers everywhere. And co-host Brian Foster, you can find most places as Boxscore Brian. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.